Welcome back. In this video we are going to discuss about the sample application on the Vertx Eclipse Vertx, right? So using the OpenAPI documents. So overall in this we are going to cover introduction about Vertx and why we need Vertx and Vertx app generator, and we also discuss about the Vert.x Web Router from Vert.x Web Router from an OpenAPI document. So I think you might have followed my other videos about Vertx. So Vertx is a toolkit for building React web applications on JVM. React web applications are both scalable as workloads to grow, and it's a resilient when failures arise. React web application is responsive as it keeps latency under control by making efficient usage of system resources and by protecting itself from errors. So especially in case of Vertx, we will build the lightweight services, which one service will interact with the other service, and we also able to control the failovers and other parts. To repeat again, Vertx is a toolkit, it's not a framework. So Vertx doesn't ship any block magic. So what we write actually, so what we get execute. So as simple as that. But why Vertx? Vertx is resource efficient and it handles more requests with less resources compared to traditional stacks and frameworks based on the blocking IO. Don't waste resources, increase the deployment density, and saves money. Vertx also provides concurrent and asynchronous calls. So you pick the model that works best for you, and the different models that Vertx provides is callbacks, promises, futures, reactive extension, and Kotlin coroutines. Vertx is also flexible as it is a toolkit. It's naturally very composable and embeddable. You can select the models that you need and compose them as craft your application. It's an ecosystem where APIs, databases, messages, and event streams, cloud, registries, security, and whatever you name it, right? Vertx has you covered with the comprehensive end-to-end reactive client stack for modern applications. Moreover, Vertx is fun, so forget the complexity and costly abstraction the way you build the big applications. With Vertx, what you write is actually what you get to execute. It's a very less lines of code, makes the more functionality for you. It's completely different from the traditional applications. So in this video, as we discussed earlier, so I'm going to show how we can develop an API using the OpenAPI document. So for that, first we need to generate the React Vertx application. So the Vertx application can be generated using the start.vertx.io. So the two dependencies that I would expect to have on the Vertx. So for this, so the major dependencies that I'm looking for is a Vert.x Web as well as OpenAPI Web OpenAPI. These are the two modules I'll be using, and core is the default module that we have. By default it will come with a Vertx application, any Vertx application. I'll be using Gradle in my application, and I'll be using Java, and at the time of recording I'm using the 4.5.0 as the version of Vertx for us. So what we will be doing, we are going to develop an API. So using the OpenAPI document, for that we will be creating a project. The project creation, which I have already done in this case. So using the Vertx IO, the project starter, and once that we load the OpenAPI document. For that we have to develop an OpenAPI document. I have seen user creation, user addition, and user get all users API. I will show you the OpenAPI documentation shortly. And after that we have to write the handlers, and we have to get the router, and we have to complete the logic, build the logic, whatever we need. The next you can run the Vertx application in your local machine. So the application, with that said, so let's move on to the application that we have currently. So the application that I have maintained is the user management vertical. So the user management vertical is actually takes care of loading the OpenAPI document which I have built, which is a user management document. So the user management document, if you simply see, there are different paths that we have. The path 1 is the users, and path 2 is the users by user ID. So these are only the two paths that we will be using in case of the OpenAPI, in case of this. So if you see, the users path has the two different methods. One is the get method, which is to fetch all the list of users, and another one we have the post method, which helps us to create the user. And in the same way, so I can also get the user ID user by using a user ID that I provide. So for this application, I created a small vertical, which is more like to perform all these operations. So in this scenario, if you see, I'm just loading a sample data for users object. It's kind of, rather than using a database, I'm just having this data stored into the local object, and I'll be performing the operations on top of this local object for this specific video. So that said, let's start our application and then move ahead. So what we did actually, before I start the application, right? So what we did in this particular application is, so the vertical is extending to an abstract vertical, which is the default one that we have. And within that vertical, I'm overriding the start method. The start method takes care of creating a route builder. So when we load this route builder, so once the load is successful, I mean to say, like, if there are no issues with the user management OpenAPI document, once the route or load is create is successful, in case of that, we will get the route builder object into an operation. So basically we'll get the route builder object. If there is a failure, it might go into the failure block of this one. In case of failure, we just simply failing the promise rather than returning some kind of response. So if the vertical is failed, probably the application itself might not start for you, because there will be a startup issues if the vertical load fails. So with that said, so if you see, like, list users, basically user management, I was talking about getting the users of this. So the list users is actually we have here, right, which is an operation ID. This is an API. API has two methods, get and post, and each method has an operation ID. So the operation ID that I am passing over here, and for that route builder object, and I am just trying to handle. So I'm getting the route context. From that route context, I'm just fetching the response, and from there I'm setting the status code, the success response status code, and I'm setting the headers as well as ending the operation that we have over here. So the second one that we have is the create user. Same way, the create user, it will be, if you see the user management, this user management YAML file inside the user. So you have a post. The post will be having a create user operation. So this create user operation ID, I will be passing for this route builder as an operation, and this takes care of creating the necessary user that I have. So in this case, I am just getting the JSON object from the body. I'm just passing this add user and just trying to add the extra user onto the context that we have. And the third operation that we have in the YAML, as I have mentioned, show user by ID. Show user by ID is actually in the show user by ID operation. So show user by ID operation takes care of searching the users by an ID, and returning that first identified the user ID. So that's a small logic that I have built. So where it takes the user ID and get the ID from the request, and from the path parameters. Once I get the ID, I'm just taking all the users and filtering the users with that particular ID and getting the user, and finally I'll be returning that user to the front end. Once we have all the route builder operations completed, so then using that route builder operation we have to create the router, and that router object we will be using in initializing the server. So in this case I am using the Vertx create HTTP server, and for that I'll be running this on 8091 port and localhost domain, and I will be passing that request handler server.request handler and the router, and router will be listening on this. At the same time I'll be closing my promise. I'll be completing my promise as well once the operations are complete, because the promise has I mean to say let me go. The promise is actually coming on the start method. I'll be completing the promise as soon as the operations are completed. And the other method that we have is the stop over here. The rest of the methods that I have in this particular vertical, it's all get users, which will return all the list of users, and add user takes care of adding up a user, and this takes care of loading the sample for that needed, and this takes care of maintaining the this users object is taking care of persisting the users information for this use case. With that said, as we have the API ready, let's go ahead and do the validation. So I'll be doing the validation in the Postman. So probably, as I was mentioning, the localhost 8091 is the application where I'm running, and users is the operation which takes care of giving the 3 users that I have. So 3 users that I have, as I was showing here, 3 users I have, right? And get by user ID. If I get the user ID 1, I'm getting Fufi, and if I get the user ID 2, I'll be getting Garfield, right? And let's check the create user. I'll be using a 4th user I will be creating, and that name is probably Malik, right? Password it might be the XYZ, right? So in this case, basically I will be inserting the user. Once the successful insertion of the user, I got the Malik back. And at the same time, if I go and search for this operation, I got the 4th user, and I'll be also searching for the 4th user, and 4th user will be the Malik, which we have added recently. That way you can build APIs. So I would say this might be disable, something like that, and I will be inserting, and if I fetch it, I'll be getting all the 5 records in the API from the get users API. So with that said, right, so as I was mentioning, we use the user management YAML file which we created on OpenAPI standards, and this YAML file we have utilized to load or create the route builder. So this route builder will be creating the routes based on the YAML file or the OpenAPI documentation, I would say, and that takes care of giving the that route builder is taking care of invoking the operations and giving the responses back to us. This is a very good example to start the applications which requires or APIs which requires to consume on the using the Vertx as well as an open API. So which will it will be very less code if you compare this logic with the other frameworks that we have, where we expose the APIs, where we will be writing very less code in this specific scenario in the Vertx based applications rather than when compared to the other applications that we have. And moreover, as I was mentioning, it's completely asynchronous, and yeah, it is also has the better performance compared to the other API implementations as well. So that is what I thought of covering in this specific video, and I would say like thank you for your patience in listening to this video. Thanks a lot.